Father in heaven tonight, as I said I would be world heavyweight champion. In the tradition of Lou Thesz, in the tradition of Jack Briscoe, of the Briscoe brothers, of Dory Funk Jr., of Terry Funk, the man who'll never die. As the real nature boy, Buddy Rogers, upstairs tonight. From the Harley races to the Barry Windhams, to the Ric Flairs. I accept this heavyweight title. Wait a second. Of Gary Von Erich. Of the fat man himself, Dusty Rhodes. This is it tonight, Dad. God, that's beautiful. And Rick Steamboat. And they can all kiss my ass.
Get ready to go inside the ropes like you've never been before and watch the most famous and infamous matches in wrestling history along with legends of the squared circle. Welcome to the first wrestling podcast in the world to take you on a weekly deep dive into classic matches. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to The Payoff. What in the hell is he doing? This is Tom Healy, and as always, I am joined by my co-host, Jeffrey Ryan. Jeff, I am so pumped because we are going to be talking about one of the most pivotal wrestling moments in our lifetime on the 25th anniversary of it happening. It is the night Extreme Championship Wrestling was born. But first, Jeff, how the hell are you doing?
Man, this week is only getting more exciting because we head to Chicago and StarCast in about 72 hours, and we have just a packed schedule while we are there. So on top of that, we just keep cranking out great episode after great episode. And after all the prep we've done for this one, and I think some of the talking points we have lined up, I'm going to say it, I think this could be one of our best episodes yet. So for all of our listeners out there, as we always say, thank you. We can't say it enough. Couldn't do this without you. You know, we say this every week too, but it helps us a ton. Subscribe, give us 5 stars, spread the word. So you can always find The Payoff on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We're at Payoff Pod. Tom and myself are on there with our own accounts too, at Payoff Tom, at Payoff Jeff. We love interacting with our fans, so drop us a message, drop us a comment. We will almost always reply back to you. So, Tom, I am pumped for this week. What else do you got?
Yeah, man, I am really pumped for StarCast this weekend. It is going to be awesome. Thanks to all our listeners all around the world. We hope that many of you are going to StarCast this weekend. If so, come to our live show. There it is. And also come to the booth, hang out with us, grab your official The Payoff koozie, and maybe we'll get to put some Steve Weisers in them that evening. So look forward to meeting all of you, hanging out, talking. And again, come to the live show, come to the booth, come hang out. Look forward to meeting everyone. And as a reminder, we're now live on Patreon. That's at payoffpatreon.com. Again, that's payoffpatreon.com. We have one tier. It's $10. It's got a weekly after show, a monthly bonus match. You get to pick the bonus match, transcripts of every episode. We thank everyone on air for joining. We've got a whole community of people chatting and hanging out in there. And we're just putting up a bunch of bonus shows too. We don't talk about the current product on here, but we will post some bonus shows. We just covered NXT and SummerSlam a few weeks back. That was fun. So hopefully you enjoy what you're seeing on there. Again, it's $10 for all of that. We're adding other stuff. It all goes right back into making the show better. So if you want to support us, that's the best way you can. And we're putting all that right into making the show better. So payoffpatreon.com. PAYOFF.com. We really appreciate the support. And quickly, Jeff, give a rundown of how we do things around here for those that are new to the show.
Yeah, of course. So we give you a weekly deep dive into a match every Monday. And each episode is broken into 3 parts. Part 1 is the build, where we lay the foundation of what got us to the match, what was going on in the business, and everything else that you'll find interesting. Part 2 is the payoff, where we watch a match along with a legend or superstar of the business. Part 3, the aftermath. And it's a hell of an aftermath this week, where we talk about what happened after the finish of the match, share how it was received by the wrestling community, and just provide our own thoughts on the match. So, Tom, our archives continue to grow. So, please share what we got and then take us right into why we chose this match.
Yeah, so if you go back in the archives, you're going to hear the same thing every week, which is covering one match, not talking about the current product, and really trying to bring you new insights and making it entertaining and fun. So, for over a month now, we've been at this. We're building up the archives. We're trying to deliver fun, unique, different episodes each week. In there, you'll find Eddie Guerrero's first title win, the infamous Judy Bagwell in a pole match, the Magnum Tully I Quit steel cage match, Pillman and Liger, Raven and Dreamer, and of course, last week, the Ultimate Challenge, Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior at WrestleMania 6. And we watched it along with the guy who first trained the Warrior, Rick Bassman, who had some awesome insight. So the archives are loaded with stuff, and we're working hard to make it better and better every week, but there's some great stuff in there. So with that being said, Jeff, the reason we're here, if you had to rank your favorite episodes, it'd be like ranking your kids. You can't do it. You shouldn't say it. It's not right. But I think this may go down as one of our best episodes yet. Picking this match was a no-brainer. It's awesome. It's incredible. It's pivotal. It had such a huge ripple effect on the business for years to come. And it happens to be on the 25th anniversary of it happening. And we get to watch it with the man who's responsible for the moment, Shane Douglas himself. Jeff, what more can we say? Happy
anniversary. It's a big deal. So I will admit I knew the throwdown of the belt, but I don't think I had any real clue about exactly what it meant on a larger scale. Doing all the research, like you said in the opening, this was just one of the most pivotal moments in sports entertainment and wrestling. This was one that was been in our list that we wanted to discuss, I think, since before we launched. This was one that you and I were discussing for a while. And, I was excited, but I really didn't get really amped until after we interviewed Shane Douglas and heard what he had to say. Then it was just finding the right time for this one. And even that became easy when we realized there's no better time than the 25th anniversary. So I want to move us along here and get us to the good stuff. So let's talk the build.
Would you say that you're extremely excited to talk about this match?
Let's get to the build. You got it, buddy.
All right, so here we are with the build. Let us set the stage for you. August 27th, 1994. Now, it's a normal show. It's being taped for television, and it's built around an NWA title tournament, which Jeff is going to get more into in a minute. But again, to Jeff's point earlier, we knew the belt got thrown down. We know about the famous moment, but we didn't realize how big the NWA title was. And so they've got this title tournament. It's taking place at the ECW arena. Now, remember, going into this evening, that stood for the Eastern Championship Wrestling Arena. It doesn't flow off the tongue. It's tough to say. Eastern Championship Wrestling Arena. So it's a packed house. Fan accounts say it felt like over 100 degrees in the building. So, Jeff, I like fun facts here. Here's the first one. Todd Gordon, on February 25th, 1992, ran the first Eastern Championship Wrestling card in front of a packed house at the original sports bar in Philadelphia in front of 100 fans. The opening bout was a 20-minute draw between Stevie Richards and Jimmy Jannetty. Now, Jimmy Jannetty was actually the one who trained Stevie Richards and hit a respectable 368 on the PWI 500 in 1992. His daughter, Jenny Jannetty, at one point was training to be a wrestler. Jeff, any fond memories of Jimmy Jannetty that you'd like to share?
I can't say that I have any.
I can barely get that out of the straight face.
Yeah.
So here's the deal. Twitter may be able to help us out here. I want to know if any footage exists of this Stevie Richards Jimmy Jannetty match at the original sports bar in Philadelphia. Love to see it. And maybe, Jeff, we could get Jimmy Jannetty onto the show and have him talk about the match. Who knows?
Got it.
All right. So see what we can do. In the weeks to come, the company would bring in big names like Jim the Anvil Neidhart, Don Morocco, and Jimmy Superfly Snuka, who was actually crowned the first Eastern Championship Wrestling champion. So let's get back to August 27th, 1994. The entire show is centered around this NWA title tournament. However, there was a tag match. It was Cactus Jack and Mikey Whipwreck winning the ECW tag titles, beating the Public Enemy. Whipwreck was a last-minute replacement for Terry Funk, who said he missed his flight. So, ironically, they put this 3-month program in, building to Funk and Jack winning the tag titles, and then he doesn't show. So, Mikey Whipwreck, who is like the punching bag of ECW, gets thrown in there and wins a title. It's kind of cool. So, the NWA tournament title on this title tournament on this evening had 8 men. So, the first round was Dean Malenko pinning Osamu Nishimura, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, after a top rope drop kick. Now, for the next match, and we have a lawyer listener out there, and a very good friend of mine, who is absolutely going to love this next first round match, which featured his all-time favorite wrestler, Doink the Clown. Now, unfortunately for him, Doink would lose in a squash to 911. I had no idea Doink had an ECW run, but Jeff, he actually did some fun stuff. So for those listening that want to find more, go look it up on YouTube. Third tournament match was Shane Douglas beating the Tasmaniac, said to be a brutal match. And then Douglas would pull on Taz's tights for the victory. So apparently a good match there. And then the final match, which a lot of people said was the best of the night, was Too Cold Scorpio beating Chris Benoit. Really cool. I bet that was fantastic. Second round, Scorpio beats 911. And then Douglas beats Malenko, which gets us to Douglas versus Scorpio. So, it's one of the things that's fun about doing the show, Jeff, is when we look at the other things that are happening in the industry at the same time as the match we're covering. So we have this crazy stuff happening in ECW. Over in WCW, they just had Clash of the Champions headlined by a new wrestler to the promotion by the name of Hulk Hogan against Ric Flair, which I didn't realize was actually the most widely viewed match ever on cable at that point. Pretty cool. WWF's got SummerSlam 94. The good thing on that show was Bret and Owen in the cage. Fantastic world title match, great feud. But then we also had Taker versus Taker in what was a disaster. So just a wild time in the business. Things are starting to take shape. I mean, this is like before ECW's known. This is before the Monday Night Wars, but still some really interesting stuff happening. So, Jeff, lay the groundwork for the build. What's happening on camera and behind the scenes, and how do we get to this NWA title tournament?
Yeah, so the NWA World Heavyweight Championship was the highest title one could win for the National Wrestling Alliance, which was the NWA. So I will always trying to paint a timeline to give some perspective. So the NWA and this title had been in existence since about 1948. It's over 70 years ago. Doing my research, there was some info out there that the origins of the belt and being a world heavyweight champion actually dated back to 1905. So it really depends on probably who you talk to and kind of what you look up, but it could almost be, 120 years old if we really want to go there. So I'll say this, because as we talk about this match and go through the build and the aftermath, there was nothing more prestigious than this title at the time. It was the top of the mountain. So fast forward to the 90s. The NWA title was vacated. This was because at the time, a WCW employed Ric Flair that he had to give up the belt because WCW was an affiliate of the NWA. And because of behind the scenes, really just politics, it caused them to split and go their different ways. So the WCW employed Flair could not hold the NWA belt. So the title was actually vacant for over a year total, starting in September of 1993. Remember, this match goes off in end of August of 94. So how did we get there? I'm going to butcher his name, but it was NWA board member Dennis Coralluzzo who proposed holding a tournament to crown a new NWA World Heavyweight Champion. Todd Gordon and a name we all know well, Paul Heyman, who at the time was Paul E. Dangerously, who at the time they were the owner and booker of what was Eastern Championship Wrestling. So the connection here, like WCW, ECW was an affiliate of NWA. Now, this is before Extreme, so we're talking about Eastern Championship Wrestling right now. So ECW told the NWA board of directors that ECW would host the tournament because at the time they had just gotten a new TV deal in early 93, and it would be good exposure for them, and it would be good exposure for everyone because the bigger TV deal helped everyone out. So if it isn't already, you're not already, at the edge of your seat. Here's where it really starts to get good. Every report says that Gordon and Heyman had every intention of using the tournament to publicly break away from the NWA and use it as the springboard to turn Eastern Championship Wrestling into Extreme Championship Wrestling. Of course, there's a lot of reports are out there that forever they'll be floating around about who knew what, but Shane Douglas was booked to win the tournament, and he was on board. So the rest, as they say, it's history at this point. So one quote that I enjoyed that showed really the animosity and really backstage politics of this whole thing going down is from Coralluzzo. And I'll say, quote, "It's not something personal between Gordon and me. It's just that we have to act like a cohesive organization and respect each other's authority. That's not what's happening. If he came to me 2 months ago and tried to work this out, that's one thing. But for the last 9 months, he and his partner have been pissing on my neck and trying to tell me it's rain. Now all of a sudden, they're my buddies. I didn't get off the boat yesterday," end quote. That's a good quote. But so Heyman, of course, followed up, quote, "I'm not doing it because Crockett," and this is the legendary Jim Crockett, who at the time was an NWA board member. "I'm doing it because Crockett encouraged me to do it. If they're going to say it's unofficial, then F them. How could Todd or I know the protocol of NWA when after 11 months of joining this organization, I've never seen paperwork or a set of rules explaining how things should be done? We've had phone calls to members not returned. We called Coralluzzo and invited him to the show as a courtesy, and he hasn't called back," end quote. So a lot happening backstage, behind the scenes. There was a lot of pride on the line because NWA wasn't what it used to be. And they wanted to make sure that the tournament brought the NWA back to before they were having all these issues with the belt and it being vacant. And really not just their popularity, but the popularity of wrestling was waning. So, Tom, I know you have some thoughts on that, though.
Wow. There's a lot going on with the build there. Great stuff. Just a few other notes that I wanted to share as I did some research on my own here was I was going through Eastern Championship Wrestling shows leading up to this title tournament. Now, Jeff, they did a house show in front of 75 fans in Lima, Ohio. But here's the crazy part. Sabu does a balcony dive in the middle of what was described to be an incredible main event between Alsto and Chris Benoit. So balcony dive in front of 75 fans. Doubt there was a camera there. I just can't make this shit up, man. So also in the lead up to, this NWA title tournament, Shane Douglas did some promos. And he was challenging Ric Flair, whom he called Dick Flair, to come to Philadelphia, and I quote, as a shoot, and come after the NWA belt. So a lot of heat between Shane Douglas and Dick Flair. Another thing I came across in my research, and you'd mentioned the wrestling business being weak, all right? Let me give you an idea of what was going on around this time. Madison Square Garden, WWF show. It does 4,000 fans. There was a fan that called it and I quote, depressing atmosphere. That same night, there's a split crew in Omaha, Nebraska that does 1,200 fans. Then they're at the Nassau Coliseum. They get 1,500 fans. The Meadowlands in Jersey, 2,000 fans. Indianapolis, 1,800 fans. This is all in the lead up to SummerSlam 1994. Just crazy. So, the business was struggling at the time, and it's wild to see some of those numbers. So, Jeff, the reason we're here, all right, each week we give our listeners a timestamp. If you want to watch the match along with our special guest, you certainly can. If you can't because you're in the car or at work or wherever you might be, you can always go back and watch it later. But if you want to watch it live with Shane Douglas, WWE Network, this is the August 30th, 1994 edition of ECW Hardcore TV. And we're going to be at the 26-minute mark on the nose. So again, that's August 30th, 1994 edition of ECW Hardcore TV. It's on the WWE Network. And when we come back from break and you hear the ding, 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 you can hit play at 26 minutes if you'd like to watch along with Shane McMahon. Shane Douglas. Geez, I'll tell you what, man.
You're best in the world.
I know, right? We have to stop drinking while we're recording these.
Calm down.
I know, I'll tell you. All right. So again, 26 minutes, Hardcore TV, 8:30:94. If you want to watch it along with Shane Douglas. And so with that being said, it's time for the payoff. All right, this is the payoff, and we are here with the franchise, Shane Douglas. Shane, welcome to the payoff.
Good to be here, brother. I see a very young Joey Styles on the screen and a couple of studs in the ring.
That's right. Well, I'm excited to talk about this match. So let's start when you first got involved in the business. You went to college. Obviously, a lot of wrestlers aren't college educated. So you get a college education, but then at some point you say, hell, I'm going to get involved in the wrestling business instead. So what tipped the point for you to say, I'm going to do wrestling full time?
Well, when I came out of college in 1986, there weren't a lot of jobs. The economy was in a downturn, and I had a lot of school loans, 77,000. It was like 77 million to me then. And I had about 2 months before the grace period was up, had no job prospects, and Eddie Gilbert and UWF had just come up with Dominic DeNucci and run a loop up there in Pittsburgh. And Eddie Gilbert called me and asked me if I would be interested in going on the road and put me in touch with Bill Watts. And a week or two later, I was driving to Dallas, Texas.
So this good.
Sorry to cut you off. My honest thought was I would do that, for 4, 5, 6 months until the economy picked up, and then I'd get back into my field, politics, political science. And here I am all these years later. I'd always loved wrestling, always loved being involved in athletics. And what I found out is once I'd gotten into the business was I wasn't too bad at it. And I was getting to work with some incredible talent, Dick Slater, Dick Murdoch, Pez Whatley, Eddie Gilbert, Terry Taylor. I mean, the list goes on. And every night was a learning experience, and I just soaked it up.
So walk us through what was happening behind the scenes about this match, because obviously something extremely famous takes place after the match. So
really?
Well, no spoilers, but you may remember. So at what point did you know that something big was going to happen after this match? Was it the day of? Was it weeks leading up to it? At what point did all this start to come together and you realized, hey, this is going to be a big moment?
Well, earlier that week, Paul Heyman had called me and ran the idea by me. What I loved about Paul's booking was he never ordered me to do anything. He would give me a range of scenarios. You can do this, whatever. And he would give me the pros and cons of each one. And that's exactly what he did with this angle. We can, if you keep it, stay the NWA champion, we can take that route. But if you decide to throw down, and I honestly believe Paul knew me well enough to know that I wasn't a big fan. The NWA had died 7 years before that. And, I was very, very much into what we were doing in ECW. So I think he had a pretty good idea of what I would do. But I didn't make my mind up until after this match, after I had won. And the reason was earlier in the day, there was a lot of things going behind the scenes all week long. The first thing was Mike Tenay had called me. At that time, he had a national syndicated radio show. And he called me and asked me if I'd heard a show that week, and I told him I hadn't. He said, you need to go back and listen to the archive. I had Dennis Corluzzo on last night. And so I did. I went back and listened to it. I had never met Dennis Corluzzo. I had seen him because Candido went over one time to talk over to the show where he was having a show. I had seen him, didn't introduce himself to me. I didn't introduce myself to him. So I knew what he looked like, never had spoken to him. And in this interview, nationally syndicated, and you have to understand, we were still making about 75% of our money from independents. ECW was just once a month. And I went back and listened to the Tenay radio show, and he said, telling anybody that wanted to book me that they shouldn't, because I would just take their money and no-show them. Now, I'm sure what he meant by that was that, I was going to be winning the NWA belt that weekend and not be available. But what that did was, in my mind, it sent a message out to independent promoters, don't try to book Shane Douglas. And I was still making a lot of my money from independents, feeding my family with that money. So that didn't sit well with me. And then earlier this day of this match, of this tournament, I got to the building and I walked in. We had to be like around 1 o'clock, I think, on TV days. And I walked in, and Corluzzo walks up to me and throws a contract in my face and says, here, you got to sign this, man. And like I often tell people, and I don't mean it to be disrespectful in any way, if God handed me a contract, I wouldn't sign it until my attorney read it. And I told him that. I said, as soon as my attorney reads it and gives me the okay, I'll be happy to sign it. Well, he kept following me around like a dingleberry all day. If I walked left, he was left. If I walked right, he was right. What blew my mind, and all day long, just so you understand, all day long I'm thinking, I'm going to do it. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to throw it down. I'm not going to throw it down. I was back and forth all day. And I went into the bathroom to do the worst of the two, 1 and 2. And I come out of the toilet stall, and he's standing outside the stall and hands that contract to me. And I went to Paul and I said, you better get him away from him to break his neck. He was really starting to tick me off at that point. And so if you watch closely here at the end with what we all know is coming, when I make up my mind is when I look over at Corluzzo and I see him looking at me and knowing what he had said that week and all he had done that day at the building. And when I say, here we go, Dad, and I throw the belt down, I think I throw the belt down first and then say, here we go, Dad. It just rolled. Not a word of that was pre-planned. But before we get to that, I'm watching this match as it's going on. The setup on the building was about 114 degrees. It was a hot August Philadelphia summer night, and the no AC in the building. As you can see, the building is packed to the rafters. The TV lights back then, we didn't have red cameras that you could shoot in just regular daylight. We had to light the place up like the sun, and so it was extraordinarily hot. And I had already wrestled twice. I had 2 pretty tough matches with Taz was the first, and I think D. Malenko was the second, which this preceded, of course, us having the triple threat or forming the triple threat. And so, Scorpio, who's an incredibly, I believe, an incredibly underrated talent, he was ready. He was ready to go, and Scorp could go when he wanted to. So I knew I had to really get my laces tightened up, because I couldn't go out there and say it's my third match. It's hot. I'm blown up. Let's take it easy. We had to deliver something that was worthy of an NWA title tournament. And as you can see, Scorpio is doing a phenomenal job in this match. Uber professional.
So you'd alluded to a little bit earlier, but tell, especially the younger listeners, explain what ECW was leading into this match.
Well, we were still a very small company. We hadn't yet become the legend that it would become. It was ECW, Eastern Championship Wrestling. The company was bought by Todd Gordon from, what was the guy's name? Anyway, it was a small company called Tri-State Wrestling. And they changed that name to Eastern Championship Wrestling right around the time, I can't remember if it was before or after the sale. And, we slowly started building. For the first 2 or 3 months, the ECW arena, that's this building, at the corner of Swanson and Rittner in Philadelphia, we would go outside and stand there on the parking lot. There was a great big warehouse store next door, and we would stand there and we would hand coupons to people, free beer and hot dogs. Come in tonight to watch wrestling, free beer and hot dogs. And that was for about a month or two, and from that point forward, it got hot. And, we started realizing that every time we had an arena show, it was packed and the people were rabid. And the legend just began to slowly grow. That was the only reason I believe that at that time, Eastern Championship Wrestling was a member of the NWA. And the NWA was trying, as we've heard a million times since, and right now Billy Corgan doing the same thing, trying to relaunch NWA that had been done for 30 years. It never works, but it's been always tried. So we were the only member that was hot, that had these kinds of crowds. And no doubt in my mind, they were trying to capitalize on their association with us, not the other way around. And that was what convinced me ultimately to go ahead and throw the belt down, because, like I said, we were hot, and I'd been on several NWA shows for different promoters around the country, and they had 100 people, 75 people, 150 people. Never before in my career had I seen the kind of energy that we were seeing in the buildings at the ECW arena. And so there was already at this early point, there was a real feeling that something special was building here. It hadn't become the legend it would become. It was nowhere near as big as it would get. But in these early days, there was a lot of excitement in the dressing room. Nobody ever was lazy in ECW, and there was a real camaraderie that I had never seen. I had heard about that from Dominic and Bruno and those old timers, but I had never seen it in wrestling. I had never seen it in the UWF. I'd never seen in the NWA. I'd never seen it in WCW. You had little friendships and stuff, but never the camaraderie that I'd heard Dominic and Bruno and those guys talking about. And that wasn't until ECW. There's Big Rosie on the left side of the ring. He passed away some years ago, one of our big security guys. He was a monster of a man, great guy.
What was it like backstage? Where did you guys all huddle up in this building? I mean, were you guys in one room, hot room together? What was the setup like?
Well, right here to the left, the ring post right there, that was the entranceway. We had two curtains, and back behind that area was just an wide open stage area. At this time, the building was a bingo hall, and it was a storage space for the Philadelphia Inquirer newspaper. So all the extra newspaper, there was an ancillary room off to the side, to the left side of the screen, behind the wall, where they would store the old newspapers that didn't sell that week. And it actually caught on fire one time, like a spontaneous fire started in there, and could have wiped the ECW arena out before this legend took hold. But there's a big famous parade in Philadelphia called the Mummers Parade, and people dress up in elaborate costumes and stuff. And upstairs, again to the left side of the screen, there was a second floor, and up there they would store these elaborate feathery costumes, look like something Flair would wear, right? These big elaborate costumes with gaudy colors and big masks and heads and things. So it was sort of like an all-purpose building, and it ended up being perfect. That bingo hall, like Vince McMahon used to try to always call it whenever I was up there on that ill-fated trip. When you work for the bingo hall company, well, in my long career, if I had a choice to work in any arena around the building, I would take this bingo hall right here. The energy in that building was amazing. The fans were amazing. The energy of the people that you were working with was amazing. It was just like you could do no wrong in that building. It's like every time you swung, you hit the fences. It was great.
Here we go.
Yeah. And then now, if Belly to Belly is textbooks. If you go back and watch, you can see, if you slow-mo it, as taught by Magnum TA, a perfectly executed belly to belly is hips lower than your opponents, up on the balls of your feet, look back over your head until you see the mat, and then you twist and turn and put the shoulder into the chest area. Scorpio was the kind of guy that I could do the run. Magnum, if you remember, used to do it as his opponent was coming off the ropes in one fell swoop. It got for me to do that, with guys that were a lot bigger than me a lot of the time. And a lot of the times, some of those guys, even the guys smaller than you, didn't have the timing. They would, stutter step or something. And you see Scorpio do something here on the microphone where, he congratulates me and says, but I want to, a shot back at you. That is, like the old timers used to tell us, think, shoot, but work. if it were real, what would you do? You wouldn't walk over after losing a match, especially a big tournament like this, and say, hey, I'm happy for you, kid. You'd come over and say, hey, you got me tonight, but I want a shot back at it. Totally legitimized it in my book. And, now I know I've got this promo to deliver. And for me, the one thing that I wanted to do was, because I've been a lifelong fan of the NWA, I wanted to make sure that I hit all the big names of the people that I really respected. And the problem was, again, in the heat of that building, and, you can see I'm blown, I couldn't remember the names. I had a couple in my head, and then all of a sudden just went completely blank. And
at one point you grabbed the mic and you're like, Ian Ricky Steamboat, because you were remembering of this time. Yeah,
right. And the fans in the audience, which I think made the promo so much better, were shouting out names, and you could tell that it wasn't a teleprompter or some script that I had memorized. This, there it is. My dad comment, and for me, like it always felt odd to do a promo, even to this day. You got a television camera in front of you and the audience behind you. And, it just feels so cattywampus because you should be talking to the people, even though there's more watching at home. Luckily, in the ECW arena, we had building full all around. So, again, I think that just lent to the credibility of the promo because I'm floating around trying to talk to everybody in the building. And then we come down to the final line, the ECW heavyweight champion of the world, and it just allowed me to turn to all four of those sides. I don't think, and I hate to say it like this, I'm not patting myself on the back. The reason this promo is so well remembered is because it was so real and so legitimate. The energy is there, the delivery is there. There's no, obviously, again, teleprompter or whatever. And right there when I threw the belt down, the best part was Dennis Corluzzo gives me this look. And meanwhile, as soon as I throw the belt down and he's perplexed, Todd Gordon is sitting next to him and he's telling him, just relax. This is just an angle. He's calming him down to keep him from losing and getting up and running out. And after this, and I hate to speak ill of him because, the guy passed away, but afterwards, Paul pulled the ultimate rib because we got to the back. And, I thought he was going to be back there cussing or whatever, and I'd have to, do something. Instead, I walked back, and Paul's got him over in the corner, and he's, real animated. Paul's hands are going, and he's talking to him, and there's the heavyweight champion of the world line. And that was when also for the younger kids watching, that was when Eastern Championship Wrestling became Extreme Championship Wrestling. Same letters. But back then everything was extreme. You had Extreme Mountain Dew, you had Extreme this, Extreme that, Extreme Sports. That's when they started, so it just seemed to fit the company, especially as we were planning to take it much larger as just opposed to being a Philadelphia-based company. And, so the Extreme so much superseded the Eastern. And the fans, keep in mind, the fans have been there now for about 4 or 5 hours in that baking hot building. And, the energy that they were, I always call them, all those fans in that building, they were our sixth man on the bench. It didn't matter if somebody got hurt. It didn't matter if somebody didn't show up. Everybody else in the dressing room was going to pick up the slack, and those fans were going to make sure that they delivered the goods for the television screens. It wasn't like a fake type of reaction. Again, you can watch them. These aren't actors; these are fans. But it was and I hate to use the word, but it was such an organic relationship that we had with these fans. They would come out and just give us so much energy for the camera, and that is obviously one of the big tenets of what made ECW so big.
Yeah, it was obvious. I mean, as a fan growing up, it was obvious to me, especially with Barely Legal. I'm watching it and I'm like, these people, they're like part of this whole thing, right? I mean, they're like, this is their night. It was everyone. It wasn't just, there's some fans there to watch a wrestling show. So right. As you look back, how important was that angle and that night to ECW?
Well, I think it launched. ECW would have gone and continued to do strong numbers and everything else had we not done it, had we decided to stay with the NWA. But, it's all speculation, but I think that was what sent it on the trajectory. Taz would later coin the phrase, the FTW belt, right? The fuck the world belt. And ECW really embodied that. ECW was, fuck the WWF, fuck WCW, fuck everybody else, the NWA, we're ECW. And if you remember my promos back then, as world champion for Extreme Championship Wrestling, I would send out challenges, shoots, to Brett, to Hogan, to Flair, to Shawn Michaels. And had they come, I certainly would have stepped in the ring with them. The fans in that building understood we were different. Raven later coined the phrase, the island of misfit toys. We were the guys that didn't fit in the other places. I certainly didn't. And later when I went there in 95, that was proven all over again. I don't expect anybody to kiss my ass, and I'm sure as hell not going to kiss somebody else's. Any business relationship is just that. The person buying the service pays the money. The person providing the service gives the service. The relationship is done at that point. It's not, well, you've paid me for my services and I've given you the services. Now you also want me to come kiss your ass. And which is pretty much what the way I felt about Vince McMahon. And all I had seen in the other companies like the NWA and WCW, and to some lesser extent UWF, was a plethora of politicking. It was like being involved in a national convention for one of the Republican, either the Republican or the Democratic Party. There was always somebody pulling the booker aside, and whispering, and pulling their buddies in, and screwing other people. It was ridiculous to me. To me, this business should always been about whoever gets into that ring and can mesmerize that audience the best, perform the best. If it's a heel, get that crowd the most pissed off. If it's a babyface, get that crowd to their feet screaming. It shouldn't be, well, this guy's not as good as the other one, but hey, he's my buddy, so screw the other guy that's better. We're going to go with my friend. But that's what I've always seen in wrestling. ECW was different. And the thing about ECW to me that always stood out was, like, I vividly remember, and I'll use him as the example, when Lance Storm came in. Lance came in a couple years into the ECW run. Those of us that were in the initial class, the first class, we had it easy, because we started with a blank slate. And, although we built what we built there, and a lot of that, all of it was what we had done. Terry Funk, Taz, Tommy Dreamer, Raven, all of us, Too Cold. But those guys that came in later, that was a daunting dressing room to step into. There were people on the outside of ECW in the business that weren't quite sure if this was a shoot. They weren't quite sure if, also for the young kids watching, just so to make this all make better sense. At the time that Eastern Championship Wrestling and it became Extreme Championship Wrestling was 1993. That also coincides with the year the UFC became a thing. And at the same time, they were having a lot of problems getting licensed in multiple places around the country because people likened them to a human cockfight, which was ironically the same problem we were having getting syndicated around the country. People watching it thought we were really beating the hell out of each other and, hurting each other and, human cockfight. And, I can still remember my promos in the early days. I would say things like, the marquee outside says professional wrestling. You look in Webster's, that's a sport, not an entertainment. And then, of course, all the stuff that you saw, it was so revolutionary and counter-revolutionary to what you saw on the other two big companies, WWF and WCW, or especially WWF, where, everybody had to be some kind of a ridiculous goon hockey player or the Dean or Duke the Dumpster Droshi. Everybody was like some kind of a bad comic book magazine skit or something.
Yeah, some people refer to it as the occupational gimmick era.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a repo man. Yeah.
Right. And none of it worked. Worked. It might have been fine for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old kids, but guys our age would never go buy a ticket to sit in an arena and watch a couple hours of that.
Well, and you bring up a great point, which is, historically speaking, this is August of 1994, which means if you were to flip the channel, look at what WCW was doing, look at what the WWF was doing. This was cutting edge. The wrestling, the hardcore stuff, presenting it more as an athletic competition, all of it. So it was fantastic. So
and loaded with tons and tons of attitude. It was oozing attitude.
A full 3 years before others picked up and adopted to it, right? All the reality-based stuff, the attitude stuff, all that stuff. Well, this was fantastic. Appreciate you watching this match with us. One of your most historic, and really set the tone for what became ECW. And then, as we know, ECW changed the business. So I think this had a major impact on the entire industry, not just ECW. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you. And before you click away from that, I saw it when it first came up. This was, Dennis Corluzzo came back to the dressing room and he was spitting nails and cussing, and he was going to sue and everything else. And Paul was waiting for him, and like I said, real animated, talking to him. And all of a sudden he waves over Charlie, our handheld guy, Charlie Bruzzese, and he slaps the camera right in his face, and you see the ECW billboard there on the microphone. And he gets him to make a comment, and the comment was, I don't care what Shane Douglas says, he is the NWA champion, and we're going to convene the board, and blah, 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 blah. And he walks out. It was like the ultimate rib on top of the rib. It was that he actually shot this. It was just comical as hell.
Yeah.
Again, sympathies to his family, but a momentous time for ECW, because this was really the linchpin when we turned the corner.
Sure was. Well, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
You're welcome, man. Thanks for talking to me.
Wow. First of all, thank you to Shane Douglas. He was a fantastic guest, shared some great information, and it's just an absolute pleasure to hear, his side of the story and his insight while we watched everything go down. So, Jeff, my first thought when I watched this, sometimes in wrestling, you're witnessing history, right? Hogan Andre, the boyhood dream coming true. The Austin era has begun. The streak is over. But this was something I don't think people realized how big it was going to be, right? It took time to really understand it and to look back and realize how pivotal of a moment this was. So, man, the effect it would have on the business was so huge. And you just, even if you knew it was a big deal or thought it was a big deal, you never would have thought it was this big of a deal. So the other thing I loved was, Shane's promo. Obviously, it wasn't scripted. It was raw. It was authentic. It was real. And I just think it's so much better when it's partially or completely based in reality, not this fictitious stuff that's scripted. It's written by a writer who's writing it for someone pretending to be something they aren't. And unfortunately, that's a lot of today's product. So, Jeff, what did you think about the payoff?
Yeah, the promo following the match is just, it's more historic than the match itself. We'll just call it what it is. There's just no denying that. The match had some decent moments, so it worked like as the final match of the tournament. But the promo just outpaced everything about the match. So, Tom, are you ready for the aftermath?
I sure am.
It's a good one. So
let's do it.
All right. So after being handed the NWA World Heavyweight Championship belt, Douglas threw down the title and instead picked up the ECW Heavyweight Championship. You heard part of it in the open, and I'm just going to read what he said because you can't describe it. You just have to hear it. So, in the tradition of Lou Thez, in the tradition of Jack Briscoe, of the Briscoe brothers, of Dory Funk Jr., of Terry Funk, the man who will never die, as the real Nature Boy Buddy Rogers upstairs tonight. From the Harley Races to the Barry Windhams to the Ric Flairs, I accept this heavyweight title. Wait a second. Of Kerry Von Erich, of the Fat Man himself, Dusty Rhodes, this is it tonight, Dad. God, that's beautiful. And Ricky Steamboat. And they can all kiss my ass. So at this point, he threw the first belt on, and he continued. Because I am not the man who accepts a torch to be handed down to me from an organization that died, RIP, 7 years ago. the franchise, Shane Douglas is the man who ignites the new flame of the sport of professional wrestling. So this is where he picks up the ECW belt. Tonight, before God and my Father as witness, I declare myself the franchise and the new ECW heavyweight champion of the world. We have set out to change the face of professional wrestling. So tonight, let the new era begin. The era of the sport of professional wrestling. The era of the franchise. The era of the ECW. So, Coraluzzo.
You were good, but I like Shane's version better.
I'll never be that good, but thank you. So Coraluzzo, remember, as the board member who introduced the idea of the tournament, said that what Douglas said was just, quote, a disgrace. That he would actually move to have Douglas stripped of both championships. So that all went down immediately following the show on August 27th, not immediately following the match on August 27th. So on the next episode of ECW Hardcore TV on August 30th, Todd Gordon delivered a promo stating that Eastern Championship Wrestling had withdrawn from the NWA and is now Extreme Championship Wrestling, and that they would recognize Shane Douglas as its world heavyweight champion. So, and here I will quote him in the promo. It said, "I listened with great interest as the representative of the NWA Board of Directors took it upon himself to inform you that they have the power to force NWA Eastern Championship Wrestling not to recognize the franchise, Shane Douglas, as a world heavyweight champion. Well, as of noon today, I have folded NWA Eastern Championship Wrestling. And in its place, we will be ECW, Extreme Championship Wrestling. And we recognize the franchise, Shane Douglas, as our world heavyweight champion. And we encourage any wrestler in the world today to come to the ECW to challenge for that belt. This is the ECW, Extreme Championship Wrestling, changing the face of professional wrestling." So just good stuff. So the then Eastern ECW Tag Team Championship and ECW Television Championships were then renamed the Extreme ECW World Tag Team Championship and the Extreme ECW World Television Champion. So going back to close the loop, if you will, the NWA World Heavyweight Championship, which I feel like at this point we've forgotten about, like, by the way. So the NWA World Heavyweight Championship was, again, vacant. So it remained vacant until November 19th of 1994. So it was Chris Candido who, through, of course, another tournament, won the belt after it was vacant for a total of about 14 months minus the 3 minutes that Shane Douglas had it. So, Tom, we've not told a story like that. There's a lot of nuance to it. There's a lot happening. We tried to cover as much of it as possible, but I know you have some additional thoughts on the aftermath.
I mean, all of that is just awesome, right? It's just all great stuff. The promos were fantastic. It's just great. Loved it. So a couple other things in my notes. I thought it was kind of funny. So a few days after this double cross, Douglas appears on a radio show saying, this is all spontaneous. I made this decision after the match. Now, at the same time on a different radio show, literally same day, right? Heyman appears on a show saying, oh, yeah, it was planned weeks in advance, and it was truly a double cross. So I don't know, Jeff, maybe having 40 writers in a room just keeps everyone better organized from a storyline standpoint. I don't know. But really good quote I came across from Heyman was, I was looking for an accurate description of our product from the day I took over in September 1993 and decided on the name Extreme sometime around March or April of 94. So a few months before this match took place. And, by the time that Shane did this, the Extreme Championship Wrestling was already ordering graphics and banners and ring aprons. So that was already being worked on, which was kind of funny. the whole thing with Shane, calling himself the franchise, being the franchise, saying he wanted to be the face of the company, it wasn't a gimmick. He really was. And I love this quote from Paul Heyman. I'm going to read it. Again, a lot of quotes today, but there's just a lot of good stuff that we want to make sure we capture. So here's what Heyman had to say. If you looked into the future of ECW, Taz could have pulled that off, but he wasn't ready in August 1994. Terry Funk throwing down the NWA title would have been very controversial since he was a former NWA champion. But we were branding the future, and Shane Douglas was being presented as the future top guy in the business. The Sandman could have done it, but his persona was more of a brawler than a wrestler. Shane Douglas's whole persona was the big man on campus, the quarterback of the team, the franchise player of not just ECW, but of the entire industry. On that particular night, under those particular circumstances, the only person that made sense to me was Shane Douglas. Great quote, sums it up. Right guy, right angle. I mean, it was perfect. So another thing I came across, Jeff, it's funny because a lot of times you'll hear, the WWE has revisionist history, right? There's like reality and then there's like WWE's version of what happened. So I come across this interview and it didn't say who was giving the interview. It just said WWE Classics, right? So this guy or gal from WWE Classics says, and I quote, "That moment of throwing down the NWA title should have catapulted Shane Douglas and made him a major star, but in retrospect, that turned out to be the pinnacle of his career. He never really burst through, other than a short-lived run as Dean Douglas in WWE. Why do you think Shane Douglas never soared higher after that night?" End quote. So again, they're just making stuff up, right? Shane had this incredible ECW run. He was fantastic. He had a pretty good run in WCW and did interesting things. Bad Dean Douglas gimmick. That certainly wasn't something that he wanted to do. But again, just interesting, right? That it was like, this is the pinnacle of his career when he went on to do some really awesome stuff. Now, Jeff, another piece of trivia for you. Assuming that you're going to count the WWECW thing as being actually part of ECW, assuming you're going to do that. So this would have taken place on ECW on Sci-Fi. What was the final ECW match that would have taken place on ECW on Sci-Fi on February 16th, 2010? Can you name that match?
Oof, I cannot.
Well, you could have given a bunch of guesses, and I bet you probably would not have come up with the match, which was Ezekiel Jackson being managed by William Regal, winning the ECW championship from Christian in an Extreme Rules match. So unless we get another version of ECW at some point, Ezekiel Jackson will go down as the final ECW champion in this match. So
he was a big boy.
He was a big boy, but
right.
Yeah, it was not exactly the way we wanted ECW to end. So
right.
Anyways, we choose to remember the good memories. So Jeff, let's talk about how this match was received in some of the publications. What do you have for us?
Yeah, I'll actually start with the Keller Report fallout because I think that was the most interesting. And so he said, quote, "With the possibility of ECW signing with MSG Network this week and expanding to other regional sports channels, it appears as if ECW is going to make a run at promoting nationally independent of the NWA. Although the tactics they use to establish their independence will be questioned, if not criticized, by many. Meanwhile, the NWA has to recover from this apparent, quote, setup and try once again to crown a champion and gain new respectable members." I will say kudos to Keller for calling it right here. I will point out, too, that in the fallout, he did put setup in quotes. And so I think at the time, because nobody knew what was going on here, but in regards to everything else, he was right on the nose here. So everyone's favorite star gifter, Meltzer, said, quote, "Douglas defeated Scorpio in the tournament finals in about 12 minutes of a 3.25 stars match where Scorpio missed a splash off the top rope and Douglas pinned him with a belly-to-belly. As Coraluzzo presented the new NWA title belt, Douglas started a long speech talking about the history of the title and names like Lou Thez, Buddy Rogers, and the Funks. But as the speech went on, he came to the name of Flair and said how the belt was part of the past and that he didn't want to resurrect something that was dead. He said ECW was leaving the past behind and that he didn't want a belt that hasn't meant shit in years, end quote. So I don't have a ton to add here overall. I think the ratings were good. I think, the write-ups were fine. No real gripes about what they said. Tom, what do you think?
I think stars are stupid.
Yep. As we're about to give our payoff score, but here we go.
No, but that's the difference. That's how we do things here. We give a payoff score, and the payoff score, really comes down to the match, the moment, the crowd, the atmosphere, the build, the aftermath, the big payoff, what the finish was. It's just about more than the in-ring work. And so I honestly, I'm not trying to pat ourselves in the back or put ourselves over, but I like the way we do things because we incorporate a whole bunch of factors as opposed to, that one sequence involved a lot of rest holds, so I got to dock at 1/4 of a star. So here's what I think. I think that, overall, strong match, right? It wasn't a 5-star classic. It was a strong match. Anytime you're doing these multiple man tournaments or matches in this kind of format all on the same night, shorter is better. So they got the right amount of time. They had a really good finish. The building was hot as hell. Shane admitted he was kind of, blown up at this point. They had already been through some grueling matches, and I thought all things considered, they did a pretty good job. Now, obviously, the right guy won, and I liked how he won. He kind of cheated a little bit earlier in the show, but I liked how it was strong. It was convincing. It was, this is our guy, clean 1, 2, 3 in the middle. So with that being said, Jeff, I think I've made it clear how I feel about our payoff scores, but let's get into it.
Yeah, time to share our scores. But we want to remind everyone, like we've said a little bit, how we do those. And so it's pretty much based on whatever we want. It's not just in-ring work. We don't share these scores ahead of time. It just adds a little bit of excitement. All of our notes, that's one thing we always leave that blank. So, Tom, I will give you the honors this week of going first.
All right, so I feel like I'm going to get some heat for this one, maybe from you, depending on what you thought of this, or maybe some of our loyal listeners on Twitter. But let me first walk through why I love this, and then I'll give you my payoff score. So I think it's important, and I think it's true whether we're talking about like sports or wrestling or politics or music, really anything. I like looking at things in historical context, right? So the same weekend of this show, we had a SummerSlam going off the air with a real Undertaker against a fake Undertaker. All right. There was just so much campy and hokey stuff going on, both in the WWF and the WCW prior to the Monday Night Wars, right? Dungeon of Doom, anyone? But, a lot of the wrestling then was not great. The product was like geared towards kids. Okay. It had no edge. There were very few elements that I'd say were reality based. I guess unless you think your accountant and garbage men are sports entertainers, then maybe you love this era. But, for me, it just wasn't the best era in wrestling. So while all this is going on, while, MSG's drawing 4,000 people, there's a lot of issues that, are happening in the business. We get a legitimate swerve. We get a shoot promo. We get this hardcore wrestling. This stuff didn't exist in 1994. And then all of a sudden, here comes this little bingo hall promotion that changes the damn game. And it all starts on this night with this promo, and it's the birth of Extreme Championship Wrestling. So I know we'll talk about it a lot in future episodes, but so much of what we saw in 96, in 97, and honestly, up until today, it's rooted in ECW. And ECW changed the wrestling business, and the origin of them changing it came from this very moment. So I want to just paint the picture of how massive this was. So, Jeff, my payoff score for this is a 9.5. This moment changed the entire wrestling business. It can't be overstated. How impactful it was, how awesome it was. And I don't know if people felt it at the time, but looking back and seeing how the last 25 years have played out, this certainly seems like a pretty damn big deal and a pretty big moment that paid off in a serious way. So, Jeff, agree with me, disagree with me. What's your payoff score?
Yeah, I'll say like you, I really struggled a bit with this one. As easy it was to talk through like the build and the aftermath, like coming up with a score was difficult because I didn't want to go too low because of what happened just immediately after this match. But I also don't want to go too high because the match itself wasn't just out of this world. So, and I struggle to even call this just like a work shoot because it was bigger than that. It started just a whole new genre of wrestling and put a lot of these superstars on the map for their styles and just these, this type of promotion and these types of matches. It wasn't a thing. And so it really started something that people weren't talking about up until this point. And so because of that, I'm going to go with a 9. I think that the match itself was mediocre at best, maybe a little above that, but you just can't, as much as I think about it, and even as we talk about it, you can't overlook the greater implications. It extends far beyond just this one match to what we currently watch and the stories that we're told. So, at the end of the day, Tom, that's my score. I consider myself, sports entertained, and not because of this match, but it has helped me to enjoy so many other wrestling stories, matches, events because of what it did. And I didn't even fully realize that until we really sat down and started looking at this one. But, I can't overlook that now because of what this match did. So final thoughts as we get out of here?
Yeah, just again, I mean, you look at so many things that happened in wrestling that were extreme or reality based. And is every single thing that happened attributed to ECW? No, but they had an influence, probably a significant influence. It all starts with this night. And that's why I just think this was so fantastic. So as I said earlier, man, it changed the game. And that's about all I can say. So other than that, Jeff, I don't know. I think that's it. Why don't you take us to the finish?
Yeah, one final thanks to Shane Douglas for joining us this week. We will have him back because that was great. And
he was awesome.
This match was such a big deal. So you can find him on Twitter. He's at the franchise SD. That's at the franchise SD. So again, this week, come find us at StarCast if you're going to be there. We will be there all weekend, obviously both for our live show, which is Friday night, and then we will be at our booth as well, too. Again, we're giving out awesome koozies, and so don't miss out on that. And make sure to get one before they're gone because we do have a limited number. So exciting stuff, though, but we'll have lots anyways. But as always, if you like what you're hearing, you can give, help out the show, subscribe, give us 5 stars, tell everyone you know. And that's all we're asking of you. And just keep listening, keep tuning in. And so you can always find us on Twitter and Instagram. It's at Payoff Pod. We're on all social media, all that good stuff. And so, Tom, I know how hype you were for this one. So I'm going to let you close it out, buddy.
Yeah, it's time for us to do the after show for our loyal listeners on Patreon. We look forward to seeing everyone at StarCast and meeting you, and hopefully you come to our live show and check it out and enjoy it. So, thanks as always to everyone for their support. And with that, this is another episode of The Payoff.